welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today on Tuesday, October 1st. It's also a great pleasure to be joined today by Esther Charlestin, who is the Democratic Party's nominee for Vermont State Governor. Ms. Charlestin has served on the Select Board in Middlebury. She is also the chairwoman of the State Commission on Women, and she runs her own educational consulting firm. Ms. Charlestin, great to have you with us today. Thank you for making the time for this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Well, our pleasure. We've got an interesting election campaign going on, and we're trying to get to as many people as we can, both local and statewide, to hear from them and give our viewers a chance to kind of get an idea of what you might do if elected. So I guess I just thought to get us started, maybe you could tell us a little bit what prompted you to run for governor. This will be your first try for a statewide office, right?
Yes, it will. It is. I know. How do I go from moving to Vermont a few years ago to now running for governor? Make it make sense. Well, I moved to Vermont, moved to Middlebury, Vermont, because I got a job there. And I remember during my interview thinking, this is a place where I can raise my children, and they can be children longer. And that is my hope for all Vermont children. And I'm happy to say it is true. They can play in the mud and not care. They do not care about brands. They want to have fun and just enjoy their childhood. And so I decided to get involved in my community. And as you mentioned before, I did run for Select Board. I ran the first time and won, and then I ran a second time and was top vote getter and was appointed to the Vermont Commission on Women and now chair the Vermont Commission on Women, which, I just love learning and growing. And then as I looked at our state about a year ago and thought about, okay, what do we need as a state? I made the assumption that Phil Scott would run again as an incumbent. And I thought it was important that to take a stand and talk about what's not going well. He's been there 8 years and there's been some gaps. And as I think about a vision for Vermont, I'm not seeing that clearly. And so my intention is to run. I'm running a grassroots campaign, really powered by the people, and I'm doing it my way.
Well, that's quite a story. I guarantee you, after I had lived here in Vermont for a handful of years, I didn't really think about running for governor, but congratulations, that's awesome. Well, let's talk a little bit about then what some of the major priorities would be if you were elected, and I'm gathering that housing policy is a big one for you, as it is for a lot of folks around the state.
Absolutely.
This is I think a fairly well-known issue by this point. We've had housing concerns or concerns about the availability of housing for folks who are seeking affordable or workforce housing for quite a while.
Yes.
But it seems to have gotten even tighter in the last few years.
Yes.
And many folks are unable to afford a place that they would want to live, even if they grew up in that very town. So what do you think the state should be doing or could do, if you're elected, that would ease that crunch on housing?
As I think about housing, first of all, it's a housing crisis, I would say, where people are not able to afford to live here anymore. And I'm thinking low to middle income folks. And it's hard. Rent is now more than most mortgages. I know I'm hearing and paying $2,500 a month just for rent, or $3,000, or it keeps going up, and it's not sustainable. And so I think about the legislature who they're working on it as well. And yes, we need to make an investment for affordable housing, but we also need to work to remove the regulatory barriers that are in the way so that we can take old buildings and make them new and make sure we have housing not only for those who can afford higher prices, but those who can't afford, who are in the middle and, of course, the low income. And so making sure that everybody has access to that is important.
So should the state be putting more money into basically, in effect, incentivizing developers or contractors who who would be able to build a housing. I mean, should there be tax incentives perhaps, or tax credits, or should you know, there should be some way where the state could make it attractive for developers to build homes or housing projects, you know, that would be affordable and that would enable them to realize a profit at the end of it.
Of course. I think the focus, again, I would bring it back to the regulatory barriers, because they won't, even if they do come, there are things that are in place. There are rules that we have that won't even allow them to build maybe like an apartment complex or what have you. And so working with our select boards and working with our city councilmen to really move that forward and make it a priority so that, yes, once they're here, they're able to build. Because, yes, we can incentivize them to come, but if there's regulatory barriers, they can't do anything. And so that would be my focus.
Okay. And sort of related in a way to that, I guess I just wondered what your thoughts were on the motel voucher program that a lot of folks who have been homeless, you know, were sheltered through that last week or so.
Yeah.
That many folks had to leave that program. I mean, it's not over, but I guess I just wondered what you thought would be a good way to go in terms of helping out folks who find themselves without a permanent residence at this point.
Yes, I truly believe in a housing first model. So getting people's housed first. So right now we have a lot more folks on the streets, a lot of children on the streets as well, and that's not okay. And winter is coming, and we know a good winter, a freezing winter is coming. And so where are people gonna go? So I believe it's important to really house people first and then figure out, okay, how do we pay for it? How do we navigate it? But to put people out on the street as they are right now is not okay. So the voucher program should go on, you figure. That's probably the best we can do in the short run, right? I understand that it's not a long-term solution, but in the short term, it would hold us over. And I am interested to know, like, what is the long-term solution? And right now, it doesn't seem like we have one. And it's not fair, because we deserve a Vermont where everybody can thrive here. Not only those who are wealthy, middle income, below income, and those who are struggling. How do we create a Vermont where they can thrive as well? And that includes having a home.
Yeah. Let me pivot over to another big issue. Certainly it's a big issue down here. I'm highly confident it's a big issue across the state.
Yes.
And that's the whole question of property tax rates and education costs.
Yes, yes.
This year, a lot of communities around the state saw some pretty, you know, sharp increases in their property tax rates. You know, it kind of varied from place to place and school district to school district, but overall, it seemed like there was, you know, went in one direction upwards. I'm just wondering, what do you think we should do about that? I mean, I'm assuming double-digit or so property tax increases on an annual basis are not sustainable for many Vermonters.
No.
So do you have some thoughts on, well, can we do this or do that, or what's your feeling about it?
Well, the way we're funding education is not sustainable. And when I think about families who own property and paying taxes and seeing those double digits go up, I think about the new family that maybe just had a baby and can't fathom more expenses, or the widower who literally is on a fixed income and has had this house for years and generations. And so how do we make it so that they're able to pay their taxes and be a part, but also not carry the burden of our education system in that way? So right now, it's unsustainable the way we're paying for education. And so coming up with a plan to make sure that we're able to pay for quality education and also make sure that homeowners aren't feeling that burden of the tax increase every year.
Do you think it might be the time when we do some things like maybe divert more of the rooms and meals and sales tax, rooms and meals tax or local option taxes into into the education fund as opposed to going to the general fund? Or do things like, my understanding is that there's some services that currently are paid for through the education fund, like the mental health and psychological services that seem to be a much bigger deal now than they were 4 or 5 years ago, pre-pandemic.
Yes.
That those are paid for through the education fund, which is paid for largely through the property taxes. If there might be a way to pull some money from the general fund to pay for those, that would kind of lower a bit of the pressure on the property tax.
Absolutely.
Would that be some sort of approach you'd want to look at if you're elected?
Yeah, I would absolutely be open to it as a short-term solution, so we can take the pressure off now and then really come up with some long-term sustainable plans.
And what do you think some of the long-term plan would look like? Would it be more consolidation of schools, or what would be some ideas you might have for, okay, looking, 5 or 10 or 20, 30 years down the road, as opposed to next year? What would be some suggestions you might have?
Yes. So I'm open to school consolidation, not at the elementary level, but I'm open to it as far as the middle school and high school level. And I've seen it done with a lot of bumps in the road in Addison County. And so where students all over are coming to the middle school and the high school. The issue with having younger kids go on long bus rides so they can get home really late, it could take an hour commute. And that is hard for children. Having my own, I've seen, I have 2 beautiful, I have a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old, and they keep me busy, and they're the reason why I'm in Vermont. And I also understand their limitation at 5 or 6 years old to be on a bus ride for 45 minutes. And so that can be hard. So I'm open to it.
Okay. Well, I'm sure it's going to be one of those hot topics.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Next January up in Montpelier. So another hot topic seems to be this question of the clean heat standard and renewable energy, and the legislature passed a bill, I think it was last year or 2023, to have the Public Utility Commission come up with a plan for how they would set up I guess a credit market of sorts for, let's say, oil distributors or people who work in the fossil fuel industry, to encourage them to buy credits. They could do that perhaps by becoming a hot water a heat pump installer, or maybe get into the solar industry or something like that. So next year, the Public Utility Commission is supposed to come up with their report, and the legislature will act on it. I guess I just wondered, going into that, what is your feeling about that approach? Do you think that's a workable one? Is it likely to drive a bit of a upward spike for oil prices for people who, for whatever reason, are happy with their oil furnace and don't particularly care to get a heat pump? What are your thoughts in general around that?
Yeah, I think being open to it is important. So I would be open to supporting it and really seeing how. I think being data driven would be my approach of, okay, well, what does the data say? And from that report, what have we learned and what will make a difference? And really doing some polling to learn what the people want. I do know of some folks who are ready to get rid of the oil and wanting to save energy, and I know that the initial cost is high. And so helping people transition would be important.
So how would we help them transition? Would there be some kind of payment from the state to help them, kind of ease the burden? I mean, because it would be a short-term impact for a lot of folks. I guess that varies around. I've heard, some, fairly substantial numbers ranging from $1,000 to several $1,000s. To help that conversion happen, which, obviously not everyone can afford comfortably.
Yes.
I mean, would it be appropriate then for the state to, appropriate a few millions of dollars to make that happen? And
I would be open to exploring it.
Okay. All right. So, kind of again related to that, we have somewhat unexpectedly, well, at least if we were having this conversation 2 years ago, it would be unexpected,
yeah.
around the whole flooding that the state has seen
yes.
this past summer and then the year before. And a lot of communities are, I think, struggling with what should they do to build resilience around that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure a lot of people in Western North Carolina right now are asking themselves the same question in the wake of Hurricane Helene. But what do you think the state's role is there? I mean, again, is it just to kind of help people get money from FEMA, or should the state be, directly involved in helping communities that are, a lot of the ones who are built that are along rivers and are most open to a flooding danger? What's the proper role for the state to see if we don't have a third go-around on that?
Oh, yeah. I would say climate change is real, and Vermont is not exempt. And so seeing the flooding that has happened, not only last year, but this year, I had the opportunity to canvass and bury and really knock on doors and asking people, hey, what do you need? And I've seen how we can be Vermont strong, regardless of party lines, coming together and supporting each other. The state's role, yes, collecting the funds from the federal government, but also I believe it will happen again. And will we be ready? And a lot of folks who are most impacted are low income, low to middle income, who are on floodplains. And so how do we help them transition? What options do we have for them? How can we be proactive and have some money in reserves so when something does happen again, because I believe it will. I don't believe it's our last hurrah. Are we ready? And do we just wait for federal funds? And federal funds take time. And so having that buffer, I think, would be important, and being proactive in that way.
One of Phil Scott's main talking points, for lack of a better term, ever since he first ran for governor in 2016 has been affordability.
Yes.
Hard to argue with that. That sounds like a good idea, but I guess, that translates in a way into what the state budget is supposed to look like and general tax rates and everything. And but Vermont is one of the very few states that is not required to have a balanced budget at the end. We don't have a law in place for that. I mean, I'm sure every legislator who's ever served has probably thought that was a good idea, but it's not a legal requirement. How important is it, do you think, for the state to have a balanced budget and kind of keep its fiscal house in order so that some of the ideas that we've just been talking about, housing or flooding resilience and things like that, I mean, is it worthwhile to kind of run a deficit budget to enable those programs to move forward, or do we have to worry about the longer term picture of a budget that's chronically out of balance year after year after year, and eventually the piper has to get paid?
Yes. Well, I believe having a balanced budget is really important, actually, for the health of the state and to make sure that everything runs smoothly. And I believe there are other ways to bring in income into our state. I read a letter from wealthy Vermonters who are in the 1% who say, hey, I would like to pay more taxes to contribute to the state because the state has been wonderful to me. So exploring that option, thinking about taxing the 1%, those who have the funds to pay more, right? Paying their fair share would be important. I'm thinking about in building a climate resilient communities, we have polluters who have to pay their fair share, huge companies. And so using that money that we would get to make sure that we put aside to build these climate resilient communities. So there's other avenues that I believe we haven't fully explored yet that I would be open to exploring as governor.
So taxing wealthier Vermonters at a higher rate would be one approach. That would be one you would advocate for if elected then. Is that what
Yes.
Would that be correct? Okay. Alrighty. I guess I just wondered also, you know, growing the economy of the state, kind of related to the last question, actually,
Yes.
isn't it? Has been a topic of conversation, again, for a very long time, probably since the founding of the state back in, what, 1791?
Yeah.
What do you think the state could do to kind of grow the economy of Vermont? I mean, what should we be doing to kind of make it a more attractive place for people who are already here to start businesses, or to bring in people from, or companies from outside to, you know, either expand their operations or set them up in the first place? What would be the way to go?
Well, I would first really focus on the people who are already here. I'm thinking about high school students who may not be able to afford to go to college, but really figuring out a path, so supporting trade schools and making sure that they know there's avenues to like make money or start businesses. Vermont is a great place to start a business, as I've been through the process, and I felt the support, and there's incredible programs out there, but what I've learned is a lot of people don't know. And so making sure that the small businesses we have here get the support they need or are connected to those resources. And of course, attracting families, right? Young families. One of the ways is making sure it's affordable to live here. Having a young family, I've heard stories on the campaign trail where people are saying, hey, my daughter wants to move back with her family, but cannot live here on a $60,000 salary. Right? She can't find housing, can't support her kids at the same time because you got to pay for daycare and what have you. And then thinking about the cost of health care, all of those things really make Vermont affordable or not affordable. And right now it's leaning more towards unaffordable for most folks.
Yeah, well, you anticipated the next question I was going to ask, which was about, you know, the state's demographics and
Yes.
how we do, what's the most important thing we can do to kind of, you know, either attract from kids who grew up in Vermont and had to move someplace else to get a job,
Yes.
bring them back here, or keep them here as opposed to going off someplace else.
Yes.
Does it just basically come down to housing, do you think, or is there more to it than that?
Honestly, I think it does come down to housing. If you don't have support here, it can be hard to stay here because it's really expensive. And so I think housing is a huge player in that.
Yeah, well, that's what a lot of folks I'm sure would agree with. You know, another issue that comes up occasionally is access to health care around the state.
Yeah.
You know, it seems like we're having a hard time attracting enough medical professionals to move here, and I guess the housing piece plays into this too. But is there anything beyond that we might want to do, or you would advocate for if elected, to make, you know, folks access to health care better?
Well, again, keeping with the staff that we do have here, doctors, nurses, and staff folks working in hospitals, I would support those unions, making sure that they feel seen, heard, and are paid well so that they can stay and live here too. And so that's a way that I would tackle that, really supporting those who are here and creating avenues for those who are staff, have avenues to grow, having professional development. So if an LPN wants to become a registered nurse, they have a pathway to that and they know about those pathways, really creating it so that folks here know that, hey, if you want to stay and grow here, you can. And of course, we can't only do that. We have to attract folks to come here. So making sure that we work with colleges all over and really let folks know how great Vermont is. And again, going back to housing, we have to have a place for them to live though. So working on that would be really, really important.
Another area that I know is probably a topic of conversation in a lot of places is, well, kind of related, I guess, in a way, or maybe not. The question of public safety and opioid use.
Yeah.
Burlington, as I understand it, is going to be opening a needle exchange center for folks who are struggling with an opioid addiction to come in and at least be able to get a safe needle. I'm assuming that while they're there, that maybe they might have an opportunity to talk to someone who saying, hey, you know, there's another way to go here.
Yeah.
And if you want help, if you're at a point where it's time to try, you really would like to break free of this, you know, here's something we can do. Do you think more towns around the state should open up these sorts of needle exchange facilities, or some kind of centers for where people who feel they can't go on like that anymore could access?
I do believe in having a center where people can come for an intervention and really come as a place to access resources, right? If they want help, they can get help, and it's known in the town where they can get that help. I would be an advocate for that, absolutely, because if they don't have that, where do they go? And a lot of families are feeling the burden, and communities are feeling the burden. And so how do we support and help folks who are ready to make that transition get the help they need?
Because it's striking to me that the state only has two, I'm not sure they're even fair to call them long-term facilities, where people go for, I think, 2 weeks, or they can go for 2 weeks, or their Medicaid covers them for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then they come back home to the same set of triggers and same environment that contributed a lot to some of their problems with the opioids or whatever, drugs like that. I mean, should the state be spending more money to make that stay at least a 4-week stay, or probably even longer would be better?
I'll be honest, I support like a 90-day stay, because honestly, if we don't take care of our own, who will? And so is 2 weeks enough? I am not an expert, so I don't know if that's the case, but from what I've heard and read, it is not. It is not for most. And so supporting Medicaid, making sure that they're able to cover a longer stay so people have an opportunity to really engage in the intervention in a way that's life-changing is important,
But again, that all costs money.
Let me tell you, yes it does, yes it does. And we know we cannot look away. Ignoring it and acting like it's not there, or just not doing anything, makes the problem worse.
So the other side of this, I guess, is the law enforcement side of it.
Yes.
In addition to folks kind of coming to a conclusion on their own that it's just, I can't go on like this anymore. There's the whole law enforcement element of it. Do you think the state should be, you know, doing what it can to kind of bulk up the law enforcement? I suppose the state really only has direct control over the state police force. Other communities have their own independent police departments, like Burlington or Manchester, Win Hall, Bennington. So that's kind of up to the local voters there to kind of make a decision on how big a budget they want to appropriate for their local. But how important it is, do you think, that the policing and law enforcement should be either supported? And I guess the other question, I'm sorry, I'm asking about 3 questions at once here, I think.
Please.
I mean, I just wondered if you think that the idea of like embedding social workers in police departments is an approach that ought to be looked at very strongly.
I would be really open to that, because I believe it is a community effort, so it wouldn't all be on law enforcement to help be that intervention. I believe we need more than law enforcement. So law enforcement, a social worker, a community liaison, whatever it may be, but it takes a team approach to really tackle this issue. And I'm also an advocate for prevention. And how do we educate our children about what drugs are out there? How do we make sure that we intervene when kids have access points, or adults, or young adults? Like, how do we, so promoting those programs, so partnering with schools. I think about, I was an administrator at a middle school, and I've seen the power of our our physical education teachers who they do, you know, they have hard conversations about no drugs, you know, safe sex. And how about partnering with them and really talking about, okay, what to look for and what to avoid, and really talking to them and engaging with children too, and young folks and young adults about no drugs. Mm-hmm. And so I would support programs around prevention. So how do we stop it from getting to our kids, our youth?
Kind of another thing on the law enforcement side of things,
yes.
I guess I wondered about your feeling about if the state should do more to regulate gun ownership. I mean, a couple of years ago, I think it was in 2018, the state passed some tightened up gun ownership rules a little bit. I'm sure there's far more that probably could be done.
Yeah.
But I guess I just wondered if you think, are we in a place where, hey, you know, compared to other states, we're doing pretty good,
yeah,
and good enough for us, or do you feel like before some horrible tragedy happens, we should make it, you know, tighten up the rules a little bit, mm-hmm. so that, you know, nobody can just sort of walk into a gun store, buy a gun, and go off and create some horrible tragedy.
Yes. So I will say I was in college when Sandy Hook happened. It was actually a town over when it happened. One of my professors lost his daughter. And so gun safety is important. Who we sell our guns to is important. So I would advocate for having just a federal background check. So if you're coming to Vermont to buy guns and maybe you have some warrants or there's some things that we don't know about, that there's a background check to make sure that we're selling it to people who are responsible and can handle that responsibility.
So, I mean, would it be a case where somebody has to be 21 to buy a gun, they have to pass a very in-depth background check, mm-hmm. You know, do we tighten up that loophole around gun shows a little bit? Would that be another thing that you'd like to see? As of right now, I would focus on really making sure that we have like a federal background check for folks who are buying assault rifles or whatever. Yeah, those huge guns. Yeah, well, I mean, we saw a couple of incidents recently that kind of reminded us that
yes,
this is very much still...
we are not exempt.
Yeah, and there's no reason why something couldn't happen here. I guess I just wondered, also just curious before we have to run here, your work on the Commission of Women, what does that involve, and kind of what's going on with that at the moment? It is incredible. And I say this because last year we had the opportunity to travel the state, really have public forums and really listen to women and their concerns that they have and the support that they need. And what I know I learned is that a lot of times we're working in silos. So how do we come together and support each other, and knowing that we can, there's resources out there, we're not alone. And so bringing people together is really important. And so we have an amazing executive director, Carrie Brown, who works with the legislature and does testimonials when it comes to things around women's needs. And it's an incredible thing to witness and watch as we make our state better. So there was just one other question maybe I'll throw your way before we have to go. A few years ago there were a lot of concerns around racism in the state. Yes. What is your feeling about where we're at? Are we making progress in that direction? Are we, or are we kind of stuck? Because I spoke to a number of folks who felt that there were incidents that happened that were very disturbing, and you know, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that non-white motorists get stopped more frequently by the police than other folks. Is it your feeling that there is progress being made, or are we really not getting anywhere? Well, as a black woman,
it is my experience that we have some work to do, and we've made progress. So we still have a long way to go. And building trust within the communities of color, and even law enforcement, as I heard you mention about being stopped. I know that's been my experience. I've been stopped quite a few times and no ticket in sight. So building that trust would be important, and working with, right now, the state has the Office of Equity, I believe, okay. Don't want to get it wrong. The Office of Equity, and so working with that office to make sure that our state is moving in the right direction would be a priority for me.
Yeah. Well, anything we didn't have a chance to talk about, or I didn't ask you, that you really feel is a major plank in your platform for governor that you would like the viewers to know about?
I would say it's been an honor getting to know Vermont in such a beautiful way. Going across, I put a lot of miles, and it's worth it, in my car around the state, just traveling, hearing stories of how incredible and resilient you are. And my intention is to be a leader that is proactive and will move us forward. And so please vote November 5th.
All right. Well, you can actually vote now, right?
Yes, vote now. Thank you.
Get it done. Why wait in line?
Yes,
all that kind of stuff.
Yes, yes.
Anyway, yeah, well, okay. Well, Esther Charlestin, thank you very much for making the time for this conversation today.
Absolutely.
Ms. Charlestin is the Democratic Party's candidate for governor, and she'll be running against the incumbent Phil Scott, and I think there's a handful of other candidates who are going to be on the ballot as well.
Yeah. But
we're really pleased that we're able to kind of have you down here, and you know, it's going to be an interesting election.
It is. Thank you.
On many levels. Anyway, thanks again. And thanks to all of you who've been with us today. Hope you found the program interesting. We'll see you again the next time. Take care.